I'll be joined by two men who served together over 30 years in Congress, one whose tenure ended today. When Donald Trump took office, there were 241 Republicans in the House. That's quite an edge. Now, there are 199. You see the flip. The big question going forward is, how does this new majority and minority handle a Trump administration that has bedeviled Washington like no other? I can also tell you something that I just got here in the newsroom. You're looking at a live shot, and the microphone, we're zooming right in on it. You know, that's the mic. We're getting our shot ready, where Speaker Pelosi will be speaking. Now, she has just announced through her office this press conference. It's going to be in a few minutes, so we're going to monitor it to see if she makes any additional news on the shutdown. We already reported what the vote plan is based on what we got from the new Speaker's office tonight. Now let's get right to it. Former Florida Congressman Carlos Curbelo and former North Dakota Senator Byron Dorgan, who served in the House for 12 years before going on to the Senate. And as I say, we're going to monitor Pelosi in the corner of the place. Let me start with you now, former Congressman Curbelo. Did Donald Trump help reduce the number of Republicans in Congress?
Ari, good evening from Miami. And no question, look, when Donald Trump came on the national stage, there were, I think, 247 Republicans at the time. John Boehner had just helped elect the largest Republican majority since the Great Depression. And today, Republicans are down to 199. So no question that the Trump effect has been bad for House Republicans. I think
let me press you right on that before I bring in Senator Dorgan. Is that something that you think Donald Trump deep down knows and is basically denying, or is it something that he doesn't even get as we look at this new Congress coming in tonight, which you're saying, as a Republican, which is interesting to hear from you, has changed hands and gone blue because of Trump's mistakes?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think what the president would probably tell you is that now the Republican majority in the Senate is larger, and he'd like to take credit for that. But without question, in suburban districts all across America, there has been a backlash against the president, and that's why Republicans have lost almost 50 seats since he came onto the national stage and became the Republican standard bearer back in 2016.
Senator Dorgan, your view, you certainly have a lot of experience, but not with this kind of president.
No, and let me say that he declared victory after the election, and you know, it's not much of a victory. I watched your coverage about today. Listen, this is a political earthquake. It really, really is. Mm-hmm. And I understand that the Speaker and the Democratic majority in the House, which is new and really important, they need to come up with a positive agenda that talks to the hopes of the American people. I understand all that. But it's also very important to have oversight. And that oversight means the first three words of almost any oversight hearing, which we haven't had for a long time now, is how do you justify? How do you justify weakening election laws? How do you justify weakening laws that protect on clean air and clean water and so on? How do you justify a tax cut that allows corporations to buy back their stock and inflates the deficit while they do? I think those how do you justify questions are so important because the oversight role of Congress has not been done now for the last several years. The Republicans had no interest in providing any oversight on all the big issues. And then if I might make one more comment.
Sure.
The reason all of this happened is quite clear. The American people wanted to create a set of brake pads with respect to this president and the worst impulses of this president. And I think that's why there's a majority in the U.S. House. And I expect Nancy Pelosi and the new majority in the House will do really important things for the country.
And as you're speaking, we're looking at what power on the move looks like. Speaker Pelosi walking here with her security retinue and a member of the leadership, Steny Hoyer, flanking her, shaking her hand as she approaches the microphone. Any minute she's going to hold this press conference. I think we're going to listen in and see if she makes some news on the shutdown and then come back to our panel. Let's listen in. I want to bring back our panel. We have the perfect panel to help us understand what we're seeing. As Pelosi says, there's a new dawn, there's a new Congress, and she's putting pressure on Donald Trump to reopen the government. Senator Dorgan, having worked with her, having served in the House, what are we seeing there?
Well, she's going to send back to the Senate. She'll get passed by her majority in the House and send back to the Senate a piece of legislation that the Senate passed nearly unanimously, in fact, by voice vote. You might remember a politician, it was a Democrat, in fact, some years ago, who said, I voted for it before I voted against it.
Little John Kerry test there?
Yeah, well, you might be in a situation here where if Senator McConnell would bring that bill to a vote, a bill that's going to pass the House tonight or tomorrow, it would put every Republican senator in that position, saying, "Well, I voted for it, but then before I voted against it."
So,
that's
Senator,
not a very good position to be in.
What you're talking about there is exactly what I was just discussing with Lawrence O'Donnell, and Hoyer's sort of backing up Pelosi right now, making the case. And as I mentioned, we're going to keep listening. If they take live questions or make news, we'll dip back in there. But right now, they're just giving more volume to what we'd heard earlier today, which is this plan. And so, Senator Dorgan, at a certain point, is she forcing the Senate Republicans to do what they didn't have to do as often and as publicly in the first 2 years, which is answer whether or not they share Donald Trump's strategy of often contradicting himself and being full of it? Because as you were explaining, they weren't forced to take as many hard votes like this when the Republicans were in charge of both chambers.
Sure. I mean, Senator McConnell and the Republicans that he leads in the Senate are trying to protect the president. And what Senator McConnell has apparently said is, we're not going to bring anything to the floor of the Senate that doesn't have the president's blessing. Yet they brought, 2 weeks ago, they brought it to the floor of the Senate and passed it unanimously because they thought the president supported it, because the president said he supported it. And if I may make one other point, obviously, this shutdown is very troublesome for a lot of people. And back in the Gingrich days, when there was a shutdown, I was one of the negotiators that went to the White House. We sat around a cabinet table with the president and the leaders of the House and the Senate day after day negotiating how we might open the government. It's really interesting to me. There's almost none of that kind of discussion going on anywhere. And it's important that we find a way to resolve this.
Well, Senator, you're pointing something out. I'll bring the former congressman, your Republican counterpart, back into the conversation. Congressman, the senator points out the grinding sort of complete disregard by the Trump administration for the impact on people's lives. And we've been reporting this out and we'll continue to do so. Whatever one thinks of the size of government or the ideological debate, there isn't even an effort to appear to be spending each workday, each weekday, negotiating over how to reopen the government as farmers lose disaster assistance, as people lose food programs for the hungry, as people lose access to all sorts of other federal lands and national parks and everything else. For what? And miss paychecks. For what? For something that, according to every other shutdown, they usually get paid afterward and becomes a huge waste, Congressman.
All right, here's the bottom line, and I agree, shutdowns are a waste of resources. They make the economy more inefficient, and obviously they hurt federal employees. But I think the broader question here is, will these new members of Congress, or this new 116th Congress, show a willingness to do what these days is courageous in politics, which is to compromise? We know that any bill to pass requires a majority of votes in the House, 60 votes in the Senate, and the president's signature, unless, of course, both chambers can override a veto with 2/3 of the membership of both chambers. If we're going to break this impasse, there has to be a compromise. If we're going to pass immigration reform, there must be a compromise. If we're going to reduce carbon dioxide emissions in this country, there must be a compromise. So that is the relevant question. I think that this new Congress getting sworn in today, a lot of people on the left are celebrating the new Democratic majority in the House. I understand that. Maybe some people on the right are celebrating an expanded Republican majority in the Senate. What most Americans want is for all of these politicians to compromise, to meet somewhere in the middle, to get something done, and to get government out of the front page for all of the wrong reasons. And that's what I hope for this new Congress. A lot of people out there, I think, on the extremes want Democrats and Republicans to fight. What I think most Americans want is Democrats and Republicans to meet somewhere in the middle and get something meaningful done. In this case, that means opening the government.
The senator, I think, is, although you're the House member and he's the former senator, I think the senator's concerned you may be beginning a filibuster. But, Senator, you get in and we'll keep it going.
They never taught us that in the House.
My point is the power of the purse, as you know, belongs to the Congress. That's really important. And it's going to be hard to compromise for Democrats, especially, to reach a decision to build a wall we don't need with money we don't have, especially when the president campaigned on it. I mean, this is all about politics, you know. It's about his campaign promise, but his campaign promise was twofold. I'm going to build a wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it. Well, the fact is Mexico's not going to pay for a wall, and I think I agree with Nancy Pelosi that we don't need a wall.
Let me press.
There's plenty of ways to provide for border security.
You make an important point, Senator Dorgan. Let me press your Republican counterpart on that, because, Congressman, isn't that what's different? You talked about compromise, but Donald Trump is the first president, not only in history, but quite possibly, I rarely talk about the future, but quite possibly for the past and next 100 years, to loudly, brashly, embarrassingly self-own and humiliate himself by shutting down the government to break a promise rather than uphold it, to break the promise that the U.S. would never have to pay for the wall.
Ari, I voted against the bill to increase funding for the wall 2 weeks ago in the House chamber. The reason I did that is because there's an obvious compromise out there that I wanted to protect, and that is to increase border security funding while at the same time granting Dreamers, DACA recipients, a future in our country. That is a very obvious compromise. Lindsey Graham is now talking along those terms. That is the way out of this, and that's why I voted against an extra $5 billion for the wall. But there is a reality here that we have to accept.
Before we go to the reality, let me push you on this, and I'm going to give you time. Viewers watching might think, wow, this seems like a reasonable, thoughtful former legislator. Fair?
I hope so.
I hope so. Okay. And yet, the leader of your party publicly treated you with such disdain, and so I hate to be the one to play the tape for you, as it were, but that's part of my job. So let's look at that and wonder, what did you do to him to make him act like that, or what is it inside him that treats other people like that, even when they're on the same team, ostensibly? Take a look at what he said about you after the election.
So on the other hand, you had some that decided to, let's stay away, let's stay away. And they did very poorly. I'm not sure that I should be happy or sad, but I feel just fine about it. Carlos Curbelo.
He put you there with some mispronunciation on the list of Republicans who lost. Was he wrong in what he said there?
Ari, the president gets 0 points for style. He's extremely divisive. He can be very petty. He takes everything personally. So there's no defending that, and I don't know very many people who do. But there is a reality here. This is a president who ran on this border security promise. Of course, he did say Mexico was going to pay for the wall.
He ran on a promise that Mexico would pay for it. That was the promise. I mean, I could tell you, both of you are politicians.
No question.
The government now hangs in the balance. The Democrats here taking power, trying to reopen the government. And we have a president who shut down the government to break a promise. And I just wonder whether that's getting through. I give you, as we say on the Hill, I give you the balance of your time back.
This is very simple. And again, I voted against increased funding for the wall because there is an obvious compromise out there. And this is where Republicans get to prove if they're serious about increasing funding for border security, and Democrats get to prove if they're serious about supporting Dreamers, the young, undocumented immigrants that I worked so hard for every day during my 4 years in Congress, because I do want a solution for them. And this is the perfect opportunity.
Senator Dorgan, let me let Senator Dorgan in as well, sir.
Ari, as I said, this is a political earthquake. The U.S. House controlled by Democrats, and we're going to be seeing oversight hearings that are significant and difficult, but important for the country. And let me say this: I hope someday, very soon, we get back to the central questions that affect people around the dinner table. Do I have a good job? Does it pay well? Do I have job security? Do my kids go to good schools? Do Grandpa and Grandma have decent access to health care? Do I live in a safe neighborhood? I mean, look, all of these things we know are the most important things to people who live in this country and have hopes and dreams for the future. And the quicker we get back to really addressing some of those things, the better for our country.
Well, Senator Byron Dorgan and Congressman Carlos Curbelo, different parties, different houses of Congress, appreciate you both being part of our special coverage tonight.
Thank you, Ari.
Thanks to both of you.